Very good. Well, let's get started. I am Mark Callan. I am the Grant Program Coordinator for the Local Government Grant Program. With me today is also Karen Litvin. She is also a Grant Program Coordinator, and we'll be working together on the Local Government Grant Program this year. Also today we have Michelle Scalise, our Grant Section Manager, and Jody Belfi, our Grant Program Coordinator for the Recreational Trails Program. And they're going to be furiously operating in the background, handling our question and answers. When you type a question into the question box, if it's a question that they can easily answer directly back to you, they will. If it's a question that they think might, the whole group might benefit from, they'll just go ahead and interject that question into our discussion so that we can answer that question for the benefit of everyone to hear. And it might not be unusual for them to send a response back to you that says, how about if you just give us a call or shoot us a more descriptive email, after the webinar, so we kind of deal with your situation a little more directly. The session will be recorded today, and it will be posted on our Local Government Grant Program website so that you can refer back to it at any time you want to. All right, so just kind of give you an idea where we're headed today. We're going to look at the program's history, the funding that's available, who is eligible to apply, the different projects types that the program deals with, the scoring criteria that we use to measure our applications. There is a fair amount of required documentation that we'll touch on, and then we'll also go over the actual online application process itself. And then we'll talk a little bit about the presentations and the timeline. This is just a nice little visual that our system kicks out, showing where local government grant program awards and projects have been distributed throughout our state. As you can imagine, local government grant programs are primarily a lot of park properties, and parks are in communities and cities. So you can kind of see that the program sort of follows the population centers. Since the year 2000, over $100 million has been awarded to local government outdoor recreation projects. We just crossed that threshold last year. It's pretty amazing. This all started back in 1998 when voters passed the Oregon Lottery Revenues for Park and Conservation. And that dedicated 7.5% of state lottery proceeds to the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. 12% of OPRD's share was dedicated to the local government grant program. Now, they had legislation written into that once we hit 150% of the 2009-11 biennium level, then that level changed from 12% to 25%, which many of you kind of been tracking with this program. That's why we experienced the big influx in funding available last year. This just kind of shows the history where we've been over the last 5 years. Many of you remember back in 2021, we did not offer a local government grant program cycle because we didn't know what the lottery was going to do. We didn't know if funding was going to dry up or what. So we just put everything on hold on a wait and see. And then in 2022, we opened the program back up again. And lo and behold, we had kind of a pent up demand of applications and double the money because we had 2 years worth of money basically. So that was a real exciting year. Then in 2023, we kind of settled into a normal application system or process, but we were starting to feel the effects of this increase in lottery funding. Then in 2024, my goodness, we had record number of applications and a record number of funding because we hit that magic trigger that increased the funding to the local government grant program. Plus they had us go back and reach back a few months and pull in even some additional funding. So this year, we're still waiting to see what kind of response we get on applications, but we think we're starting to kind of settle into what we think is going to be the new normal, with having about 15 million to award on an annual basis going forward. This year, we have allocated 300,000 for the small community grants category. We've allocated 2.2 million for the small grant category, and we've allocated 12.5 million for the large grant category, for a total of what we think is going to be around 15 million. The small community planning grants, the maximum request there is $50,000. The average award in the 24 cycle was 43,000. The maximum award in the small grant category is $100,000, and in the 24 cycle, the average award was 74,000, just to kind of give you an idea. And in the large grant category, the maximum award is $1 million, just like last year. And last year, the average award was $635,000. For acquisition grants, again, the maximum award is $1 million, and the range typically runs between $500,000 to $1 million for acquisitions. Now, it's very important for everyone to understand this right up front. This is a reimbursement grant program, meaning that once you're awarded a grant, you get the notice to proceed and you start your project. You need to have enough cash flow within your system to be able to initially pay all the bills up front for that particular quarter or time or whatever. And then you turn around and submit a reimbursement request to us, and then we will reimburse you the percentage that we said we would. If you're a large community and it's a 50-50 grant situation, we'll pay you 50 cents on the dollar for every eligible dollar that you spend on the project. If it's an 80-20 situation where you came in with a 20% match, we'll pay you 80 cents on the dollar. But you need to kind of you have to at least have an adequate cash flow to kind of get the ball rolling. And then from that point forward, you can submit reimbursement requests, get reimbursed, and then continue to pay bills. Or some of our larger jurisdictions, they just wait till the end and submit one large comprehensive reimbursement request at the end. That's okay too. Eligible applicants to the program are cities, counties, parks and recreation districts, port districts, and metro. This is the way the legislation is written. Now, if you're in the audience today and you think, I'm not one of these eligible applicants, you can still be involved, but you need to be, say if you're a club or a 501c3, you need to be partnered either with your city or your parks and recreation district or the county. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and Karen is going to tell us about matching requirements.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so this program also does have a match requirement. It's based on population. So you'll see here on your slide that cities and districts have different population requirements than counties. We have a 50% match required for cities and districts with a population greater than 25,000 and counties with a population greater than 50,000. So that means that the grant will pay 50% and match will pay 50% of the total project cost. So we get sometimes folks applying match to the amount they're asking for a grant, but we apply that match to the total project cost that you come out with. So make sure when you're doing your calculations, you look closely at that. There's a 40% match requirement for cities and districts with a population between 50 and 25,000 to 25,000, and counties with a population between 30 and 50,000. And then there's a 20% match for our smaller areas with cities and districts with a population under 5,000 or counties with a population under 30,000. If you're in a parks and recreation district and you're not completely sure of your population, we do not want you to just use the closest city. So you'll want to go to your census data and look at the boundaries of your park district and calculate the applicable population there. I think most of you may know that. If you have questions about how to do that or need guidance, feel free to reach out to us and we can help point you in the right direction. So the match that may be included is really diverse. This can include your local agency budgeted funds out of your budget, cash match, but it can also include what we call in-kind match. So that can be some softer costs. So if there are costs associated with labor and equipment that are donated by a local agency, same with materials and supplies, the cost of those can be applied as match to the match portion of the grant application. If you're seeking another grant to supplement the project funding, you may count match from another federal grant, not another Oregon state grant necessarily. And there are other eligible grants as well, but it's really important to look at those grants that you're counting as match because they're not always applicable if they're from a same fund source or something like that. So if you have questions about an applicable eligible grant, please reach out to us and let us know. You can also count private donations, of course, and then volunteer labor. You may also count. If you do that, we are going to request timesheets for those volunteer laborers, and we're going to look at how you calculate their rate based on what your agency uses for similar laborers doing the same kind of work. So just be aware of that up front, that we're going to need that supporting documentation. Another thing you can count as match in this local government grant program is the value of land. If you've acquired land within the past 6 years that you would like to use as match, This land, if you have purchased it, must be dedicated for park and recreation purposes, and it must be within the boundary of the proposed project area. So make sure that any land that you are planning to use toward your match meets those criteria. It needs to be open for public recreation. It needs to have been acquired within the past 6 years, and we are going to look for an appraisal of the value of that land, as well as proof that it was purchased within that 6-year period. So we can also count as match some pre-agreement planning costs. So those would be things that happen before your actual project start date with us. But those are limited. Those pre-agreement planning costs have to have taken place within the last 2 years before your project award starts with us. And those costs cannot exceed 15% of the total project cost. Some of the things that might be used in those pre-agreement planning costs would be your site investigation and selection, some of the surveys or preliminary archaeological or environmental assessments that you might need to do. So you can seek more information on that in our grant manual. And if you have questions, again, reach out to us. But they can't exceed total 15% of that total project cost. Again, not the amount of the grant, but that total project cost that includes your match. And we want to see those in the budget. So everything that you are applying toward the project should be reflected in your budget, even if it's a pre-planning cost. I think that, hit on that one, Mark. Oh, okay, so I touched on this a minute ago with donations. Volunteer labor, you will calculate that as the rate paid as a general laborer. Okay, so anybody that you would normally employ to do that work, we would look for the same rate to be applied to their volunteer match rate. If they're a professionally skilled worker, so if a plumber or a mason or someone doing skilled work, then we're gonna look that they are using a rate to calculate that based on what those laborers would get paid in the open market if they were employed in doing that work. We're going to ask for timesheets again to document this. If your agency, usually cities and counties have a schedule of what they pay these folks. If you don't have that, BOLI, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, has rates available, excuse me, that you can use for determining what rates to apply for this volunteer help. Donated materials likewise should be calculated at the reasonable and fair market price for those items. So when you put in your project budget narrative and your explanations for how you determine your match amounts, we're going to want to see how you came up with that rate. So just making sure that you're using a fair market rate. You can do a little bit of research on that of what it would cost if you had to purchase it, and use that in your matching documents. Same thing for donated equipment, the fair market rental value if you had to go out and rent equipment. So if you're going to use your own heavy equipment for a project, you can calculate the match based at the rate that you would normally bill that out, or that you would normally have to procure that for. So that would be the rate you use for any donated equipment, hourly rate.
Very good.
All
Thanks,
right,
Karen.
back to Mark.
So let's talk about project types. Project types that we can deal with within the program are acquisitions for property, development, rehabilitation, and our small community planning grants. And of course, the common theme here is all these things need to be outdoor park and recreation areas and facilities. And anything that we deal with has to be open and accessible to the public at large. Acquisition refers to the acquisition of land and or water areas for public recreation. And this can include property for new parks or additions to existing parks, space for trail networks, and just open space in general. When we do an acquisition, as we kind of touched on this a couple of times already, it's very important to have an appraisal done for that property. Even if the property was donated to you, or you paid $1 for it, we still need to see an appraisal, and that establishes the value, and then that is the value that you can use as match, or it substantiates the purchase price, either one. In most cases, you can just rely on the standard appraisal format, which would be this Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practices. However, if you think there's going to be a chance where you want to pursue any federal dollars in this same project, maybe at the same time for some reason, then you'll probably want to just go ahead and jump up to the Yellow Book appraisal, this Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions. So it's probably a little more detailed because it's federal. It's oftentimes referred to as a Yellow Book appraisal. But normally, just the standard appraisal should be just fine. Once an appraisal is initiated, it should be reviewed by a qualified appraisal reviewer. And this is often referred to as a desk review or a desk appraisal. And what that's basically is, we're asking you to do an appraisal and then to pass it off to another appraiser for a second opinion. This is just a check and balance that we rely on. And usually the reviewer will basically go through the original appraisal and they'll write an opinion letter afterwards saying, yes, I concur with the methodology, I concur with the comps that were used, and I agree with the assessed value that the original appraisal came up with. However, if there's some discrepancy, then those two appraisers will usually kind of work back and forth to kind of work that out and arrive at a mutual decision. So we like to see this all happen before these come to us in the form of an application. Both the appraisal and the appraisal review are due to us at application time. Those appraisal costs can be included in the project as part of your match, and they need to be identified as such. Now, you might have just a sliver of property next to an existing park, and you think, boy, we'd like, this came up as an opportunity. We'd like to pick up that little half acre to add it to our park. That would round things out really nice. And we have this process called a waiver valuation. And that can be used if your property, if it figures under 25,000, it just doesn't make sense to go out and get an appraisal for that. So if you can go to an established realtor in your community or even your title company and say, hey, can you give us some comps for this property? And if you can get an established realtor to write an opinion saying, look, we've looked at these comps and we're confident that this property is worth $15,000, and we'll accept that. And we understand there's no reason to go out for a $3,000 and $4,000 appraisal on something like that. So we do have this process in place. We also have another tool in our toolbox called this waiver of retroactivity. And this is an unusual situation where you've got a piece of property in your jurisdiction and it comes on the market and you think, wow, that'd be an awesome piece of park property, but it's prime real estate. It's going to go fast. If we don't jump on this now, we're going to lose the opportunity. If that's your situation, you can shoot us a letter, say, explain the situation, say we've got a prime opportunity for park property, but we need to jump on it now. We will send you back a brief packet for you to complete and send back to us, just kind of some basic property assessment type things. And then if everything looks good, we'll give you the green light and you can go ahead and buy that property and then turn around. What this waiver allows you to do is to apply to the very next cycle of the local government grant program for funding for that acquisition. Now, again, you're jumping right in a competitive process with everyone else. There are no guarantees, but at least it gives you the opportunity to buy the property, lock it up, and then apply for funding. You may get funded, you may not, but it's worth a shot if you feel it's worth a gamble. So there is that to consider as well. In an acquisition process, if there are any structures on the property, we're going to want to see an inventory of those and what's the intended use. How are they going to fit into an outdoor recreation plan? Are they going to be incorporated, or are they going to be flattened and you put park property over that? So we're going to want to kind of know what your intent is. And then if there's going to be a delay in the development of that property, if if you kind of spend all your money just buying the property and it's going to be a while before you can develop it, ideally that property should be open for some form of recreational use in the meantime. And then we really would like to see some sort of development take place within 2 years. So this might be something to consider if you're looking at a piece of property. It's going to be a big nut to crack to purchase it. Can you go ahead and work toward the development within about 2 years afterwards? So that's, something to weigh in the balance. Development projects are what we think is, you can just imagine this is what, creating something new. We're developing something. It's like development. So basically we think of new outdoor recreation facilities in accordance usually with the SCORP, the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or your own community comprehensive plan, or your parks master plan, or some type of local planning effort. We just want to see some sort of local input into the reasoning behind this new development. And we talk about outdoor recreation. I mean, all these projects, as you can imagine, are fair game: play fields, playground equipment, picnic areas, trails, water trails, bike facilities, outdoor swimming facilities, skate parks, et cetera, et cetera. This is all fair game within outdoor recreation. Along with this comes other support facilities, is the way we refer to them. And that, of course, things like roads, parking areas, restroom buildings, picnic shelters, things that might have a little more of a secondary use. But you think of, we talk about only outdoor things being eligible. Well, a restroom building is obviously an indoor facility, but is very important to supporting outdoor recreation. Let's face it, a restroom, when you're recreating outdoors, a restroom helps you to recreate in that area longer. So they're very important. We do a lot of restrooms. Rehabilitation projects mean the repair, restoration, or reconstruction of existing facilities. And these fall into these categories. Usually either the facility no longer meets the access requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act, so bringing something up to accessible standards, or the facility is beyond its life expectancy, it's become obsolete, or possibly it's been destroyed by fire, natural disaster, or vandalism. Or maybe it doesn't meet health and safety code requirements anymore. And then also changing recreational needs. We don't see very many tetherball poles around anymore. So maybe this is something you need to change out in your park system. The one big one we see, some people have mixed feelings about this, but we see a lot of tennis courts being relined for pickleball. That's a big demand in the community right now. So those are the kind of things that fall into the rehabilitation category. We like to see photos submitted with all of our applications, but particularly with rehabilitation projects, because we want to see what needs rehabilitating. This little red outhouse configuration on the bottom of the screen, that's really a restroom facility that we helped an agency replace. So big rehabilitation project there. I'm going to pass it back to Karen, and she's going to tell us about small community planning grants.
So in addition to our acquisition and development rehab grants that Mark was talking about, we do offer some small planning grants. They are a maximum of $50,000, and we've set aside $300,000 this year for this cycle toward those grants. And these are available to cities and districts with a population of less than 10,000 and counties with populations of 50,000. So planning can take a lot of resources, and often these smaller cities, districts, and counties just don't have the resources available. So this grant is here to help with those resources so you can get solid plans in place. Okay. So there is a match requirement for this as well. It's a 20% match for those, as you see, cities and districts less than 5,000, counties less than 30,000 population, and then a 40% match for cities and districts with a population between 5 and 10,000, or counties between 30 and 50,000. So these grants are really for recreational planning, and they fall into 3 main categories. So our system-wide park and recreation plans, those are going to identify system needs in your area, look at available resources, any required capital project investments that are needed to accomplish your short and long-term park objectives. We want to see really substantial citizen involvement in these system-wide park plans. So make sure that you have that as part of your approach. And then we're going to want to see adoption of the planning document through a local land use approval process when it's all finished. Those site-specific park and outdoor recreation plans are really going to target a specific park that was already identified in a system-wide plan or a comprehensive plan by a city or a county. These also should include public outreach and an analysis process that really shows the need, and a detailed plan would be an outcome for this that shows how the full development or redevelopment of that site or park needs to take place. This also, we would want to see result in a formal adoption of this plan through whatever that local process looks like. And the third category under the planning grants is the community or regional trail system plans. So these are really for providing guidance in the development of transportation, recreation, and open space networks. These should be areas that traverse a community or a region. And I do want to note that these are only for non-motorized trails. So We don't want to see any motorized trails, including if you put in a waterway, a water trail plan, that's acceptable under this grant, but it should be primarily designed for watercraft that are non-motorized, such as canoes, kayaks, rafts, drift boats, things of that nature. Okay. So these planning grants generally use the work of a consultant to come in and help put these plans together. I already touched on wanting to see that local community engagement as an aspect of this with public participation. So a lot of these budgets typically go toward that consultant costs of bringing in those specialists who really help pull this all together for you and develop that county, community, or site-specific plan. So the public participation, we want to see at least a couple times where you've engaged the public or more, just depending on your local area and how that works. But we'll look for that in your project application. And then again, the goal is to have a plan that will guide the future park or trails development.
Okay, we've talked about a lot of things that we can do. We do need to touch on a few things that we cannot do. And the local government grant program cannot do indoor facilities. Things such as community centers, indoor swimming pools, unfortunately, historic buildings, meeting rooms, maintenance buildings, equipment. We don't like to get into projects that involve routine maintenance or deferred maintenance. You know, we feel that those are really things that should be, you know, kind of handled at your own level, in your own jurisdiction. We can't do anything with facilities that cater to professional, either arts or athletics, exhibit areas for academic, historic, or economic, entertainment or non-recreational purposes. We can't get involved in that. Anything that's kind of an exclusive use area, say, you know, if a ball field is pretty much locked up with a particular softball slow pitch league or something like that. You know, we want things to be open to the public in general. We can't get involved in historic sites, archaeological sites, historic structures, museums. There's other buckets of money for those kind of things. And the same thing applies for acquisition of land to help public schools in their you know, playground areas. There's other buckets of money for that, so we don't get involved in those areas. It is very important that in your project, it's very foundational that you need to either own the property outright or control that property for 25-year minimum through a lease. So you have to either own it or have control of the property, and you will need to provide a copy of a deed as part of your application or a copy of a lease agreement. Lots of times we get copies of tax assessor statements. We really do need to see a deed. So if you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind and start working on that now, that'd be great. Okay, so you submit your application. How do we score them? We rely heavily on the SCORP, the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. This one particular issue is new for this year, and we'll kind of go through some of the particulars of that. It does look real similar to previous years, and I think in some ways it's actually streamlined a little bit. So I think a lot of you will appreciate that. It is embedded with the application as a side file with the application, so it's easy access once you open up an application. But if you want to look at it independently, if you go to oprdgrants.org, our website, and if you're on the local government grant program website and you just type in SCORP in the little search bar, you can go right to it. You can go to the actual SCORP site if you're interested. And this is the upgraded, the new criteria for this year. This is going to guide us for at least the next 5 years, possibly more. Everything is going to look pretty much the same on here. The only thing that's really outright new is point number 4, this balancing conservation and recreation. And that has to do with overcrowding and overburdening certain recreation spots. So that's really the only thing that's new. Everything else is just kind of reshuffled a little bit, maybe tweaked a little bit, but pretty much a lot of the same categories. I'm just going to go through a couple of question examples here so you can see what they're like in the application. This is going to be question number 1, and it's consistency with statewide priorities. This is a big one because it's worth 20 points, so you want to pay some attention here to it. And that's, does the project address any of the statewide priorities identified in the 25-29 SCORP? And if so, what needs are addressed? It's going to tell you exactly where to go. See tables 11.1 and 11.2, pages 152 of the 2025-29 SCORP. And it's going to lead you to these tables identified below here as 11.1, the public recreation provider identified need at the statewide level. And then table 11.2, the Oregon resident identified need at the statewide level. When PSU sends out the surveys to create the SCORP, they poll recreation providers, which would be people like you today that are watching, those of us that are in the responsible position of providing recreational facilities for our constituents. They also send out another layer of survey information out to Oregon residents saying, hey, as a user, what do you want to see in our parks and recreation systems? So that's kind of the twofold responses that we see within the SCORP. And those tables are going to look like this. And as you can see, I'm just curious, can you see my cursor moving around? Very good. Okay, so you can see this quadrant here. And this top table, 11.1, this is the Oregon Provider Survey. So these are things that you as a provider responded to the survey. And then it's divided by close to home priorities and then dispersed area priorities. So close to home is going to be suburban and urban. Dispersed area is going to be maybe out in a forested type situation, more certainly more rural. And the top responses in this close to home provider survey is restrooms, community trail systems, accessibility and opportunities for people with disabilities, children's play areas, outdoor sport courts. And finally in the SCORP this year, all sport courts have kind of been lumped together. I'm kind of glad to see that. Pickleball, tennis, baseball, hockey, volleyball, inline skating, et cetera, et cetera. And then sports fields. And again, these are all lumped together too. Soccer, baseball, football. So I think it's a little more user-friendly this year. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at this quadrant, this one, and this one, they're actually fairly similar. They're just kind of reordered a little bit. And then statewide priorities for the Oregon resident need. This is what the citizens said they wanted to see in close to home situations. Again, restrooms rate high, free of charge recreation opportunities, directional signs and details about trails, nature and wildlife viewing areas, accessibility opportunities, that was up here again, and then nature, dirt, soft surface trails for walking. So really, when it comes to answering that question, you don't need to provide a real lengthy answer. You just need to cite these bullet points, basically. You know, what does your project address this? If you're addressing a community trail system, there's your answer right there. Yes, our project is, the entirety of our project is a community trail system. And if it has a restroom in there, then, you know, that's an added plus. So that's kind of how these tables work. Here's another example of a question. Here's question 5 in the application. And again, this is a big one. It's worth 25 points. Local needs and benefits. Needs identified through at least one of these. So it gives you 4 options to qualify. And that's public recreation provider identified needs, which we just described, and then Oregon resident identified need. It's going to be referred back to those tables again. But there's also 2 more categories here of local planning documents or a parks master plan. Okay, so the project that you're dealing with is not specifically listed in one of those tables for the top 2 responses here, but your local parks master plan does indeed identify this need that you have in your community. Or maybe that need just came up through public workshops and public meetings. Maybe it's not in a specific plan per se, but you've had workshops where your community has told the Parks Commission, look, we really need this dog park. So all of these are fair game. It says you just need to qualify through at least one of these different options. And again, it will point you to these broader tables here. These are all county specific. So this is just 3. It's going to list all 36 Oregon counties, and it's going to have the county response for the Oregon Provider Survey. So in this case, Multnomah County providers said, we believe that we need more trails connecting with other communities. We believe we need directional signage, or we need interpretive displays. So these top 2 are Oregon Provider Surveys. And then down here we have, oh, excuse me, these are all county. Okay, yeah, these are all specific to counties. We have close to home categories and then dispersed area categories. Now, flipping the coin a little bit, we have the Oregon resident responses, and these are not per county. These are just lumped together. So again, they are divided by suburban needs. You have to kind of read the fine print here, rural needs, and then statewide needs. So if your project involves a restroom, that's what you'd want to list. If it's free of charge recreational opportunities, that's what you'd want to list. So be very careful to, read through these tables and take specific note of whether this is a suburban need, a rural need, or if it's a statewide need, and then that's what you want to put into the application. We have some tools that are kind of embedded with the application to kind of help you along the way. The Local Government Grant Program Manual is, again, it's an attachment right along with the application. There's a lot of great material in the manual, very helpful. And you can search on that, of course, by just putting in a word search, and that it'll help you drill down quickly to the topic you're looking for. The 2025-29 SCORP is also an attachment to the application. We also have this, if you're interested in doing planning project, the 2013-17 SCORP appendix it's a planning guide. It's a very nice tool. It hasn't been updated because it just simply hasn't needed to be. It's a good timeless tool. These things are in the application, and they're also just on our website and the Local Government Grant Program website in general. Okay, now we do require a few attachments, but they're really good attachments. So you want to get familiar with this list and kind of start working on these and know what's involved here, because some of them, a little bit of lead time would certainly work to your advantage. We're going to be looking for construction or concept drawings. We're going to look for an environmental checklist that is a packet that we'll talk about that later, but that's an attachment that you will download, complete, and then load back up to the application. And then we have a land use compatibility form that we want you to fill out and complete, give to your planning department. And then once that's completed, load that up with the application attachments. We do ask that you use our form. It is specific to this program. And then we do like to see a collection of maps. We want to see a vicinity map. Where is your project in relation to your county or your city or the state or some reference point? And we're also going to want to see an urban growth boundary map closest to the project, a park boundary map, a project site plan. That site plan could be the same as your concept drawing, but it could be different as well. And then if your project is selected for funding, we will forward your application to our State Historic Preservation Office for their evaluation, and they will want to see a 7.5-minute USGS topo map or a 1 square mile map with geographic features that are identifiable, or a KMZ file from Google Earth. So they're going to want to see that. So that needs to be in the application as well. We like to see photos. And there's an example of a resolution to apply for a grant as this attached as one of the attachments, but most agencies have their own format. But there is an example here that shows some specific language that we do like to see included with the resolution to apply for a grant. So that's a requirement. And then this environmental checklist back up here has some opportunity for you to send out some request for comment forms to 3 different state agencies. And then when those are completed and sent back to you, you'll want to attach those to the application as well. If you're doing an acquisition project, like we discussed before, you're going to want to see, we're going to want to see the appraisal and the appraisal review included with the application, and also proof of a willing seller. This can be an email or a brief letter saying, yeah, the seller is willing to sell this property, and then a title report on that property as well. So going on with the attachments here, I'm just going to let's take a good look at this. And I'll be honest, this is one of the things that we have to go back to applicants for the most, is we really stress the importance of the park boundary map. This is a great example right here. And you may not have the capacity to get all the way to this level, but try to come as close as you can. You notice this one has got the agency identification here, the project identification, has a legend down here, a scale, directional arrow, and then a very clear and distinct line outlining the actual boundary of the park. Now, it can include features within here. It can include the site plan. Your one map can actually do both. But the most important thing is we do need to see this exterior boundary. This becomes very important because once local government dollars are invested in your park property, that property is basically dedicated in its entirety for recreational use for a 25-year period. And if something happens to that boundary to shrink for some reason, that creates a conversion, and then that means you'd have to find replacement property of equal or greater recreational utility value there. So this is very important, and we would prefer to not have to ask you for a better one. So just letting you see an example of a good one here. Now, the environmental checklist packet is a packet within the application. You just simply download it, work through the checklist. It's a self-checklist type process. And then include a location map. And again, we talked about this, you know, the topography map or the Google Earth map, or a fairly detailed map that shows identifiable features. So the area can be identified easily by looking at the map. And then you include the state agency comment form, which is all part of this packet. And then we ask that you send this off for evaluation to State Lands, ODF&W, and DEQ. Now, they are very busy and they have 30 days to respond. If they do not respond, we interpret that as the same as we don't have a comment. So if they do not respond to you, you can just rest assured that they probably didn't have a comment, and that's okay. If they do respond, you'll want to include their response with the application. Now, if this is something that we feel like maybe this is kind of more of an environmentally sensitive thing, we think, you know, DEQ really should have responded to this, or hopefully they would, we might ask you to actually, you know, go back and maybe take another run at this if we think a DEQ response is really important. But again, what we don't like to see is we would prefer that you not send these review forms off to these agencies and then 10 days later say, hey, I really need that in a week, you know, because they just don't operate that way. They've got a big backlog of work and they'll work through them as fast as they can, but don't hassle them, let them do their process. If they don't respond, you know, that's their decision, but they're pretty good about turning this stuff around usually. So now, if your project is selected for funding, we will submit your application packet to the State Historic Preservation Office for you. You do not need to submit anything to the State Historic Preservation Office. Now, there are two forms that I failed to mention in the previous slide. There's two forms related to SHPO, and yes, you do need to fill those out because the forms need to be present in your application so that they're ready to go. If you're selected for funding, then we submit those forms and your packet to SHPO for you. You don't need to do it, we'll do it for you. The contact list that you're going to see in that environmental packet looks like this. You can see here is State Lands, and then here's some details on what they want to know and don't want to know. So in other words, you know, if there's no ground disturbing activity, you don't need to contact them, but even if you're putting in a fence post, that's ground disturbing activity. So that's a pretty fine line there. Fish and wildlife, again, here's the parameters that they're looking for. Now, if it's DEQ you're applying to, there's going to be four different people here that you might need to respond to depending on your region. So you want to read which county this representative is dealing with. So, but that's a good handy little guide, tells you who to contact out of those three agencies here at the top: DSL, ODF&W, and DEQ. Now, on the flip side of this page, there's also going to be a number of other agencies that list a lot of other agencies you could contact if you think it's relevant. If you have something to do with the Marine Board, then you might want to, you know, if your project involves them somehow, you might want to contact them as well. They're on the continuation of this page. There's going to be a question in the application about accessibility. We're going to ask, does your agency have an ADA transition plan? It's a yes/no question. Either you do or you don't. If you don't, we're going to ask, have you done a self-assessment for the existing facilities? And again, we've got some tools attached to the application for you to help you in that process. You don't need to submit anything about this. We just want to know that you've taken a look at the project site and you've given it an evaluation for ADA accessibility, and the assumption, of course, is you're going to follow through with the construction side of it to make your project up to ADA code. We mentioned this land use compatibility statement earlier. We do ask that you use our form, include your construction or concept plans, and you might list any kind of permitting that goes involved with that. And then you want to include the Lux form with your application. And I'll just say right now, if you're dealing with anything that has to do with the Army Corps of Engineers, you want to get a head start, get a running start on that one. If it's an acquisition project, if you already have an appraisal, that's great. If it's been within the last 12 months, that would qualify. But have you gotten an appraisal review? If not, you want to get started on that. Do you have proof of willing seller? And will development occur within 2 years of that acquisition? Okay, now shifting gears a little bit, how do we actually do the application process? When you go on to oprdgrants.org, you will see either this link tab in this middle paragraph where the green arrow is, or you'll see a blue button up here that says apply now. Either way, if you do not have an Access account, that's where you'd go to set up an Access account. And once you do have an Access account, you'll log into your agency's website and it will look like this. And you'll see this red button that says new applications available. And when you click on that, you're going to realize that, well, boy, there's a whole bunch of applications here because we're mixed in right with a lot of heritage applications as well. So you want to zero in on these local government grant program applications, and you have the opportunity to select development, rehabilitation, or acquisition, or planning is the other one that you will see this year. So you select the application that you want. So if you want a development application, you'll click here. And then that will drop it from the available applications to your actual applications tab. It's going to look like this. And then you will actually open it up and you click on that and you'll go to the project information to actually give it a title. And from that point forward, it'll have a title like you're seeing here, like Deschutes County project, et cetera, et cetera. So once you're into the application page itself, you have these various tabs. This is some brief project information here. Some of it's auto-populated. Your contact information will be auto-populated. This area right here is going to be auto-populated depending on what you add down here. This is the actual budget builder section. And I've just built kind of a hypothetical budget here. There'll be a button here that says add line item. You'll click on that. You'll get an active window to add. In this case, we've had gravel 20,000. CXT restroom building 100,000, plumbing 50,000, electrical 20,000. And then I've added in city budget, and there's going to be a box up here that says how much of this is match. I'll click that box that says all of this is match, and I'll plug in my 50,000 again, and that'll drop this 50,000 down in here into my funding category. This up here is this is actually total project costs up here, and this layer down here is the actual funding, and that's going to end up looking like this, both up here and down here. You can see down here I got my total project cost is 190,000, total match is 50,000, total grant funds requested is 140,000. My percentiles are here. I'm at a 73% grant and a 26% match. I'm a small community. I need to come in with a 20% match, so there I go. I'm in good shape. That's kind of a quick look at how that works. When you're building your budget, we encourage you to don't be too brief, but don't be too detailed. What we don't want to see is a one budget line that says 1.7 million construction. That doesn't tell us much at all. And then on the flip side is, we don't want to see 50 line items and get down to the nails and screws, because then if you don't use those nails and screws, that actually becomes a problem. So we don't want to see us boxed into a box with the budget, but we need to have a good enough budget to tell the financial story of the project. So likely categories would be design and engineering, earthwork, construction, restroom building, play equipment, fall surfacing, plumbing, electrical, irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. These are kind of the broad categories that make sense, that tell us, okay, we're putting in a park, we're putting in a restroom building, it's going to cost 150,000. We're putting in play equipment, that's going to cost 100,000. The fall surfacing is going to cost 50,000. This is a good story. This tells us exactly what we're going to be paying for with the grant. We ask that you do not include a separate line for contingency. We understand that this is common practice in construction bidding, but within the local government grant program, we want every dollar to have a home and a purpose. And if you have a $100,000 contingency line, we don't know what that $100,000 is going to buy. So you can have contingency dollars, but just spread it throughout the entirety of your budget. So just, add a little to all the other line items to create that contingency. As Karen mentioned earlier, design and engineering is limited to 15% of the total project cost. So if you've got a $100,000 project, 15,000 can be devoted to design and engineering. Again, if it's $1 million project, 150,000 can be devoted to design and engineering. Design and engineering is important. We just want to see the majority of the dollars being spent on actual work on the ground that'll be lasting going forward.
Mark, before
Yes.
before you move on, I just wanted to note for folks who haven't used OPRD grants before, please don't wait till the very last minute if you don't have an account, because there's a process for staff to approve that. So if you go in the night before the grant is due and think you're going to set up an account and get all your stuff in, you might end up waiting. So just wanted to put in that little note to not wait.
Good point, Karen. Thank you. Start early, start early, start early. When you submit your application, we launch into our technical review and we look through it to just make sure that the application is complete, that it's a reasonable budget, just like I just described to you, that there's an appropriate scope of work, are all the attachments included. And actually, you cannot submit the application until there's something filled in every attachment slot. So it has to be something in each slot before the application system will allow you to submit. We also look at past grant performance and compliance. If you've had some issues in the past, that kind of may reflect on your eligibility to move forward. So we look at that as well. And then once that application is ready to go, we submit that to the advisory committee. And the advisory committee is a 10-member committee they serve 4-year terms, and it's made up of representatives from east side of the state, west side of the state, large cities, small cities, people with disabilities, a representative from a Parks and Recreation district, and a representative from Oregon State Parks, and then 3 public at-large folks. We typically meet in mid-June or early July to hear the project presentations. This is for the large grant requests only. This is for applications requesting 100,000 or more than 100,000. The committee members go through and they score each project. Those scores are averaged and put on a ranking list. And then that ranking list is forwarded to the OPRD commission. The committee does not say yes or no to any projects. They just score them. And then we line up that list with how many dollars we have available, and we fund everything we can until we run out of money, basically is what happens. Applicants applying for greater than 100,000 must make a presentation to the committee. The presenters have 20 minutes to make their presentation and answer questions. We recommend that you allow like 7 to 10 minutes for questions from the committee. They do like to ask questions. Committee members will have already gone through your application, so you don't need to completely redo, verbally your application, but this is your opportunity to show the budget, show pictures of what the finished project hopefully will look like, and tell us why this is really important in your community. PowerPoint is the most common type of presentation. It's not required, but it's basically what everybody does. And if you do that, we need to have a PDF version of that presentation delivered to us 1 week before the actual meeting. We use that as a backup at our end in case there's any kind of hitches. We want to be able to keep moving once we get into these presentation mode. This is what advisory committee meetings used to look like, but then when the pandemic hit and the volume that we were dealing with, we kind of shifted to mode, well, this is kind of what our presentations look like now. And then once it goes to the advisory committee meeting, then we forward these to the OPRD commission, which looks a lot like this, actually. Okay, there's no project presentations for small community planning, or excuse me, the small grant category, 100,000 or less, or for the planning grants communities. Those applications are scored by an independent OPRD committee. Just kind of going over our annual timeline. Every year we try to open in January. The cycle is open and applications are available. We do our webinar in February, and that's what we're doing today. The large grant applications are due April 1st. And then as soon as we start getting those in, we start launching into the technical review on those. And then on May 1st rolls around, small grant applications are due, and then planning grant applications are due May 15th. Like I said earlier, in late June, early July, the advisory committee usually meets to go through the large grant applications. And then in July or August, the small grants and planning grants committee are reviewed by the internal OPRD committee. And then in September, the whole shooting match goes to the OPRD Commission for their final review and approval. And then in October and November, ideally, that's when we can start sending out project agreements to grantees, and they can for review and signing, and then we send completed agreements back to grantees with notice to proceed letters, and that's when project work can begin. It is very important that project work not begin until you've received a notice to proceed letter. Everything that we can reimburse you for must happen within the parameters of the dates within the project agreement. So once you receive a notice to proceed letter, that's when you can start work. You can place orders and get things lined up on paper, but don't do any work on the ground or exchange any money until you receive a notice to proceed letter. Once you've been awarded a grant, there are some responsibilities for the grantee, and we expect you to submit quarterly progress reports. These are very important to just keep good communication going, and it helps us to be able to look at your file at a glance and just see what's been going on. And this is a very easy process. It's very user-friendly within the system. It's the same place where you go for submitting the application, oprdgrants.org. It's an easy form. Usually a couple of sentences is all that's needed really to kind of communicate to us what's going on. You just fill in some fields and submit. It is very important that you keep accurate accounting and record keeping of all your project expenses. Ideally, you will assign a project code to this so that at some point you can plug in your project code and have accounting kick out all those expenses and all the payments for that project. So that's going to become very helpful when it comes time for submitting a reimbursement request. If you've got any staff time that you're using as match, you'll want to make sure that you have a system in place to track time applied to the project by any of your staff people or your public works people, and keep a record of that. And if you have just regular volunteers from the community, you want to have a system in place to record their time on it so that you can report that as well. Same thing for donated materials and supplies or any kind of donated equipment. Just remember to keep good records of this, because you want to do it at the time it happens. Otherwise, it's really hard to go back and recreate any of that. When it comes time to submitting a reimbursement request, you want to include all copies of project bills and invoices. And then also we need some form of confirmation that those bills have indeed been paid. And this usually is in the form of an accounts paid report or a general ledger report. That's the easiest and the best way if your accounting system can just plug in your project code and kick out all payments made within that time period. If you do need to submit copies of canceled checks, please, please, please block out account numbers on those checks. We cannot store account numbers within our system. So remember to just block those out on any kind of canceled check copies that you send to us. Again, we expect that the project will be completed within 2 years. You have a 2-year window to complete your project. Amendments and extensions are possible, but we deal with those on a case-by-case basis. And of course, the project area and facility must meet ADA requirements. It's not uncommon for us to see where a project will include a sidewalk and then playground fall surfacing, and there'll be a 10-foot gap between the playground and the sidewalk. There needs to be a continuous accessible pathway all the way from the sidewalk into the playground area. And we hate to send projects back and say, hey, yeah, unfortunately, this is not complete. We need to see another 10-foot stretch of sidewalk connecting your sidewalk to your play area or your fall surfacing or something like that. So just keep in mind that everything needs to be flow seamlessly ADA accessible from beginning to end, anything you touch with project money. Lastly on this, if at all possible, try to plan for staff transitions. This is probably one of the biggest hurdles we see at our end when it comes time to closing out a project or doing a final reimbursement request. Someone in your agency has, this project is their baby, they run with it, they get it all launched, and then they move on to another jurisdiction. And then the project close time shows up, and some poor staff person in the accounting department says, they contact us and say, hey, we have this $500,000 grant, I understand, and we would like reimbursement. And that's a big hole to have to dig out if someone just kind of dumps that on your desk. So try to plan for that if at all possible. When your project is completed, we would like to see some sort of acknowledgement sign there. If you want to do a sign like on the left of your own creation, that's great. But if not, we're happy to send you one of our signs. We have these pre-made. We'll be happy to send this to you to identify that local government grant program funding was applied to this project. Just kind of going over some final points here on responsibilities. Park and recreation areas and facilities developed with local government grant assistance must be dedicated for park and recreation purposes for a minimum of 25 years. Park and recreation areas and facilities acquired with local government grant program assistance must be dedicated for park and recreation purposes in perpetuity. And we will provide you with a notice of grant to be recorded at the county with the deed, so that there is a notation with that deed saying this property is dedicated for park and recreation purposes for perpetuity. A conversion is the act of converting local government grant program funded property or facilities out of public recreational use. And again, if for some reason, some piece of park property that was assisted with local government grant program funding shifts out of recreational use, it'll be incumbent upon you to find replacement property of equal or greater recreational value to replace that property that was lost. That brings us to the end, and now maybe we'll check in with Michelle and Jody and see how the question and answer time has gone.
Well, I'm shocked because we have not received one question, which is
Wow.
not normal for these webinars. So
It's very unusual. There, I
Yes.
was like,
Mhm.
okay, bring them on, but we
Yeah.
can do that now, Mark.
Yeah, it
I'm
looks
sure
like
we're
we
waiting for
do have
questions.
hands up. So just for folks on the line, there is a Q&A box, but if you'd rather ask verbally or can't find that, sorry, the icon, we can unmute you. So I'm just going to go down the list, and Dawn, you're first up. I'm going to unmute you. So go ahead with your question once you, well, maybe you'll have to unmute yourself too.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Your Q&A box says the host hasn't set it up.
Oh no. Well, something new with Zoom every day. So sorry about that, folks. Go ahead with your
apologize.
question.
That was the only thing I was going to say.
No. Okay, cool. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. And sorry for everybody else if that's been frustrating you this whole time. But we'll, yep.
We'll
take
hang
it.
around and answer any questions you have.
Okay, and no other hands. Oh, there we go. Unmuting. I don't. There we go. Go ahead.
Just to get the population for our district compared to our city boundaries, how do I get that?
That's a good question, and that's always a challenge for districts. And the fundamental question is, how are you funded? Do you have tax? Are you is there an assessment through your tax base somehow that goes to your district, or do you have a district map?
We have a district boundary map, and we get tax funds through the county, through the county assessor. So I'm assuming he would just figure out how many people are in that district.
That'd be where to start. Is your district the same boundary as your town or city?
No, we're larger.
Much larger. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's something you just need to kind of figure out and kind of Sherlock Holmes at your end, because a district boundary can be smaller than the city, the same as the city, or much larger than the city. So we kind of rely on you to kind of figure that out.
So if you go to your the census data websites, there's probably I don't have off the top of my head the standard one, but there is a way to define boundaries there and figure out what's the tax base within that space, that you can figure out the population essentially. It might not be exact like to the street, the exact street of the boundary, but you should be able to find that through the
I know we are right on the cusp of, we're under 5,000, but just close. We're talking probably 300 people, and then go out in the county to pick out more people in our district. It may put us over the 5,000. That's why I've got it. This is really tough for me right here. I've got to get the right exact number.
I understand.
I wonder too if the Special Districts Association could
Yeah.
also be a good resource for figuring that out, or they might even have some of that data at the
Yeah.
association level. So I would reach out to them too if you continue to struggle with what that boundary is.
That's a very good
All right.
suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, Lonnie, I am bringing you in.
So we have two projects. One would be a large grant project, and the other one would be a planning project. We're a small city, about 3,500. Can we do multiple applications to the two different programs? Or are we restricted to just one application? We have to pick which one.
You can do two. The question that might come up is if you are submitting for, a large project, but yet you're also doing a planning exercise, is that large project somehow backed up by some other plan or a previous plan?
It's so we want to do a planning project for one of our parks, and then this large grant would be on another park.
Okay,
We have
yeah,
two parks in our city.
that makes sense. Yes, and that is possible. You can apply to both. You can actually have two active local government grant program projects at any given time. But again, those will both be assessed completely independently, and they'll be assessed on a competitive basis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lonnie. And then I'm bringing Rick in. But one thing, I was able to find a workaround and turn on Q&A, even though we're in progress. So if other folks would rather type them in, you can go ahead now, I think. And Rick.
Okay, yeah. So I was looking at matching funds available, and I noticed like equipment cost and different things like that, volunteer hours and things could all be considered based on fair market value and things like that. The Public Works Department in the city that we're working in plans to do much of the work. So how do we figure out what their donation of time, hours, or whatever? Do they need to submit like a contract for a certain dollar number, or keep track of employee hours? How does that work?
Yeah, keeping track of employee hours, and usually what we normally see is we see some sort of a timesheet that's coded so that any public employees work, if they're working on the street here or the park here, the park has the code number, and then you can kick out all the hours devoted to that particular code for that job.
Okay, and then they'll be using like heavy equipment and stuff like that. Is that like also we'd look at fair market value of what it would cost to rent that same equipment?
Yes, and most agencies that we see when they submit for reimbursement, they submit documentation that has, again, they track the equipment use hours right along with the human hours, and it'll be coded per the project, and then the time used, and then they'll just have a standard scale, say like heavy equipment. And I'm just saying hypothetically, like $100 an hour for a backhoe or something like that, and that's what'll get reported.
Okay, and so they can use like the actual like salary
Yes.
reimbursement hours for the employees. Okay, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, Thomas Maloney, bringing you in.
Hello, and thank you for the webinar. The question that I have is in regards to acquisition, and if we're successful in both our grant application as well as our negotiations and acquiring the property, we plan on expanding one of our trail systems. That being said, following the acquisitions, there would be a period of planning. Just making sure that we're going forward properly. Do we need to include in the grant application things like signage and kiosks, and other trail amenities that we would be considering doing either on our own or through another grant? Does that need to be articulated in our application, or can we just speak to the acquisitions of the property?
No, an acquisition project is purely that, just the acquisition. Now, in the initial question, basically, what will this project do? You can certainly, describe what your down the road intent is, but as far as the acquisition itself, no, all you need to address is the actual acquisition. And that's all we will fund in an acquisition project.
What I was hoping to hear. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. We have a question in the chat from Josh with Grants Pass. Would a project of softball/baseball field light upgrades qualify for a match with the open and accessible to the public at large statement when they are reservable and fee-based, the fields? So can facilities that require reservations or fees to use them for like sports fields be eligible?
They can be. Michelle, you look like you're poised to respond.
Yeah, so that's fine. You can charge fees for your facilities. You can reserve facilities, but it just needs to be also open to the general public to do the same thing. So we just don't want any one area monopolized by one league, where there's no reasonable times and days for the general public to do the same. So as long as the access is equitable, that's fine, and you are allowed to charge fees on your facilities. If you have more detailed questions on your specific situation, then I'd reach out to Mark after.
Thank you. Another broad question I'm not sure how much we'll be able to answer today is, are there any substantial changes in the new SCORP version? Or do we have some kind of summary of any like major things for folks to know? Which is a great question. Because I'm not
I would say
sure that
no,
we
there's
have.
no major changes. There's maybe just maybe the one new question that I referred to, it kind of has to do with overcrowding on park facilities, and does your project help overcrowding? Other than that, I would say that the mix of tables that you need to refer to has been made more user-friendly than in the last 5-year cycle. This is my impression in working with it so far. I think it's a little more streamlined. So I think you'll be pleased to see that.
One thing to add is if you applied last year, you're not going to be able to cut and paste your answers. The questions are slightly different. And the SCORP is based on, recent data. So SCORP is always based on data across the state that there's surveys and whatnot. And so that's more recent, but it's pretty much the same. And like Mark said, there's some stuff added, and the tables are different. Like that all that stuff is going to change. So there's no exact transferring your last application to this one.
Right.
Thank you. Another good question I'm wondering if other attendees might actually be able to answer better than us is what software programs could be helpful for creating concept plans or maps for submissions? I know us grant coordinators aren't usually the ones doing that kind of work, and everybody's got their own software, ArcGIS, things like that, but I don't know if anybody else, Mark or Michelle.
I would say talk amongst yourselves, talk to
Yeah.
your peers, because we are the fortunate recipients of a lot of good maps, but we don't create them. So that's I wouldn't know how to advise you on that. A lot of concept plans come from engineering firms and architectural landscape firms. So that's usually where the real nice fancy ones come from. So
yeah. And I'd say too, just for a lot of this leaning on ORPA, the Oregon Recreation Parks Association, of all your peers that do this planning work, where we're in the position of giving out the money for your work. So okay, another one. We're in the last stage of updating our Parks and Recreation System Plan. We have our needs assessment element completed, yet the adoption of this plan will occur after the April 1st application deadline. Are we able to use the data from that needs assessment even though it's not yet adopted?
certainly.
Yep.
Yeah, you're close.
Yep, I would agree.
Anybody else?
Okay, one more. We have a recreational project that serves the community but is on school district land with public access. It's not a city project, but consists of trails and a targeted disc golf course. would this project be eligible? It would be maintained by the school district, not the city or the partner Parks and Rec district. So it's
It all
on
comes
school
down to
district
has-
land. Mhm.
It all comes down to has control of the land. So, does the school district still own the land and control the land, or does the park district have a 25-year lease on that land? That's the fundamental underlying question.
Great, thank you. Nothing else. Maybe we can hang out for a couple more minutes.
I see a couple hands, but I'm assuming
yeah.
those are,
Yeah, Thomas and Don, your hands are still up. If you have more questions, you've already got the ability to unmute yourselves, but yep, there we go. There we go. Okay. Our Parks Master Plan was completed in 2017. Can we still refer to it? I would assume yes. If that's still your plan
Yeah.
that is in place and guiding your agency, then yes.
I think that's still probably new enough. You know, sometimes when you have an older plan, then the committee will start to ask questions about that. And it always helps. One tip for anybody, even if you have a recent plan, is to do some refinement of your plan. So like if you're doing a specific park project, then you might want to re-engage the public and just that goes a really long way with the committee. They really like to see that you've done some more you know, refinement of that plan for this particular grant and project.
All right.
I think Takeo has another question.
So this one has to deal with what we're talking about there with the park plan. Our park plan ran out in 24, so we're working with the city and doing a combined park plan, but it's not, it won't be completed till the end of this year. So I'm going to have, you know, you said we could use some of the information that they've already gathered for us, so I'll be able to use that. But the old park plan, will that be will I be able to use that?
I think you
If you feel the information is still relevant, certainly. I think, you know, the bottom line here is we just want to know, do you have a plan and have you gone through a planning process? And like Michelle mentioned, you know, have you updated it all? You're obviously in the process of updating it because you're starting in a new one, and any new information would probably color the information from the previous one or build on it. So, sure. Anything else, Jody?
Nothing else in the chat. One thing I just wanted to mention too, I know, I think both Karen and Mark kind of touched on it with requesting accounts on our grant site. As long as you have an email address that's associated with your organization, like I've already approved one for somebody in the audience from Veneta, because you've got your Veneta address approved, get that done. But if you have volunteers or partners that you want to help fill out your application, we could connect them to your account, but that gives them access to everything, all your old agreements, your new applications, your reimbursements, everything. And we can do that, but we do need an email or something from the applying entity just to say, yes, we can give this person permission to access our account. So we can certainly do that, which I know goes a long way for help.
Yep.
But nothing else.
Okay, well, our contact information is on the screen. We will be more than happy to field questions down the road as you may think of them. Feel free to give us a call or an email. We'll be happy to talk through any concerns you might have. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we will talk to you again soon, probably. Thanks, everyone.